everybody. Welcome to another exciting, fun-filled, expeditious, hair-raising episode of Radiorama, where, as the name implies, I show you how to work on radios, and occasionally stereos, occasionally TVs, anything that tends to run on vacuum tubes from the 1930s through about the 1960s or thereabouts. And today we have an Arvin AA5 model number 2573N Flame. Is it flame turquoise or just flame? It says parentheses. We got ivory willow green. How does that have anything to do with turquoise? I don't know. Pinkish red color. I don't know if it works or not. It came in with a bunch of other donations. This cheap plastic mesh material needs to be re-glued. So let's go ahead and fire it up. I don't advise that you do this if you don't know what you're doing. Good chance it's going to hum. I can see a little bit of filament coming through, so that means the filament string is intact. Whether or not that means the tubes are good, it's hard to say. I hear a hum. Kind of works, but the electrolytics are basically done. They're not completely shorted, but they're done. And a lot of people, they don't understand what causes that hum to happen. And the reason it's humming like that is because when you have a capacitor, like say this, then the capacitor itself, it's basically a battery. It's a different kind of battery, but it's a battery that can hold a charge for a very small amount of time. And so when you have AC coming into the set, it's basically going back and forth to the power plant or the source. In this country at 60 times per second. And in those gaps between switching back and forth, that's going to create some interference noise. So what this does is essentially kind of bridges the gap and makes sure that we have constant electrical power flowing. And it feels like that plastic sheet should just come right off of there. And it looks like there's 4 screws holding the back on, so we'll remove those. First, it's a wise idea to remove the power cord just in case. Getting any surprises. That's not good. I get a feeling that that connection might be, that screw mount might be broken because it's just dangling in the air. But that doesn't mean we can't glue it back. This is made out of a brittle type of early 1950s plastic. Ah, there we see. This part has come unglued. And not much to write home about. It's about as plain Jane as can possibly be. We have our 5 tubes on a PC board. That's probably right. The reason the radio wasn't working. One of the antenna leads came off of the loop, so it probably actually worked, but we still need to replace that, and that's the only thing to replace on this whole thing. The rest of these are ceramic capacitors. I can see that someone kind of jerry-rigged a new cord on. The original safety interlock cord is gone, so we'll need to fix that because we don't want people to stick their fingers in there and electrocute the crap out of themselves. It looks like is that really all that's... Is that seriously all that's holding this in here? That's kind of ridiculous, but I understand. By this time period, American sets were basically make them fast, make them cheap, you know, get them out the door. And this little tabletop radio is about the cheapest of the cheap. And I can also see I'm going to have an issue with gluing the plastic mesh back down because that Arvin logo is spot welded plastically I'm not even sure if that's a word. It is plastic welded to the case. So I'll need to drill or melt that out in order to get that front off of there. But we do need to do that. I say we, me. So let's pull the chassis, the speaker out, and kind of take a looky-loo around, even though there's not much to see here. Well, the chassis pulled out pretty easily, and about as basic as they come. There's exactly two electrolytic capacitors here. There's a 50 and a 30 microfarad capacitor rated at 150 volts. And it is mounted to this PC board. And let's see, looks like the two positives are here and there, and then we have three contacts where the negative of the can is connected. We'll probably need to bridge these two because the can itself acts like, you know, the contact point between these two, and when we take it out and put the two new individual electrolytic capacitors in there, we're going to lose that connection. I'm not really concerned about the values. I'm just going to put 247 microfarad electrolytics in there and call it a day. Now, you got to be careful about these old PC boards. They're very brittle, and so we're going to need to use something called a solder sucker to remove the old solder so we can get that electrolytic can out of there. And I'll prop my camera up on something so I can show you how to go about doing that. Alright, so let's get started here. Here's my little solder sucker, which by the way is just about worn out. I need to get another one. But let's see. Get my bearings here again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright, so what I'll do is start heating up the solder around the joints here. And then you want to get the solder sucker right up next to it and pull the solder out. Sometimes if there's a lot, you'll jam up the tool. You can see here how that solder's coming out. And you know, the thing is that you want to be very careful not to force that electrolytic out of there. Just want to remove as much of it as possible. Let's see, again, I'm getting my bearings here. Where are we removing stuff from? And here's the last lug here. Now, what I'm going to do next requires putting my glasses on because I can shoot myself. I'm going to cut these guys off so I can get my tool down there a lot closer. Oops, sorry. Keep on hitting the camera with my hat. Some of these other guys that do radio videos spend a lot more time propping up their camera and stuff, and I really appreciate those fine folks. They're doing a much more professional job than I do. That versus me, where I just like jerry-rig everything. Been doing this for about, I don't know, 3 years, and I still haven't done anything to upgrade my cameras or equipment. Guess I'm kind of lazy like that. Alright, let's see if this is going to move. Yeah, it's already starting to wiggle a little bit. So sometimes you can come in and like heat up the leads just enough to kind of like see if you can get it to move a little bit. This grounding lug here is probably going to be the biggest problem. It's still stuck in there quite well, so we still have a lot of work to do here. Need to come back in here and make sure. You know, the problem too is like the tip of my solder sucker has worn down to so much. I really need to get another one. I like these smaller ones. There's the gigantic blue ones called Soldaputs. I can't stand those guys. But, you know, to each their own. Whatever you're comfortable with. Ah, now we're making real progress. I've got all of them out except for this great big guy here. And there we go. Now it's out! So we can put our new electrolytics in. We have the positives here, and our two negatives there. Well, that was simple enough. We have the new electrolytic capacitors installed. Our little jumper between the negatives so that bridges that gap. So, let's see if it works. Which, hopefully it will. It's nothing worse than starting with something that kind of worked and then doesn't after you fiddle with it. All right.
Musk appears to be leaning into plans for a cage fight with Mark Zuckerberg and to stream it live. Musk wrote on X, formerly Twitter, that the battle of the billionaire's cage fight will be live streamed on X. He wrote, Zuck versus Musk fight will be live streamed on X. All proceeds.
That is the stupidest crap ever.
Owner of X, Tesla, and SpaceX, and the Meta CEO agreed in June to settle their differences in a cage fight. A bit of a, okay,
It does work. We've got some kind of dirty connections. I mean, it's a dirty radio, so it makes sense that it'd be dirty connections. So what I'm going to do is clean this up a little bit, clean the contacts, and then I'm going to work on the case, which is sitting over there. Okay, onward to the cabinet. I was able to melt these little guys out and pull the screen out of there. So I'm going to take this over to the sink and clean it up. Clean this guy up too. It's just plastic. I'm hoping I can flatten it out and just heating it up and maybe put it down somewhere flat. I can glue it back down in here. Without that, this piece is going to look like crap. So I need to be careful with it. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is use a hair dryer to heat up this plastic piece to flatten it out a little bit. And when it gets kind of melty, I'm going to put this board on top of it and this anvil on top of that and let it cool, and hopefully it'll have memory and be flat. Or it could end a disaster. I don't know. We'll see. Well, it's mostly flat. I'm going to give it one more little heating and cooling cycle, and then I think it'll be ready to glue back onto the thing. Okay, the piece is about as flat as it's going to get. I'm trying to figure out what to use to glue this down with. I'm thinking Lexel. It's clear. I can just like daub it on here, which means making a mess out of my fingers, but whatever. And then sit that back in it. I don't want to put it on that thick though, because it'll come oozing out of the holes, which will be gross. Well, there's good news. I was able to glue the plastic back on, and it looks pretty good. And there was a little crack up here in the top, and I've fixed that, and I reinforced it underneath with a little metal tape. So now the next step is going to be using some Novus number 2 plastic polish on this with my mechanical buffer. I found that makes all the difference in the world. I could tell if I kept on doing it by hand, I was going to give myself arthritis, if that's medically possible. But using a machine to do it for you, much better. Welcome to the modern era. Okay, so here's the Novus number 2. And my mechanical buffer. I buy these little pads. They come in little kits from Home Depot. I think they're about $12. They last me, I don't know, like probably about a couple months, but I go through a lot of radios. And so I'm going to use that as the applicator to buff into that surface. And you can see how like dull that is. So we're going to try to clean that up with some plastic polish, because these came looking like a mirror from the factory. Hello everybody, welcome to day number 2 of working on the Arvin. And as seen, I was able to glue that plastic back in. And I also used, as I mentioned, the mechanical buffer. Looks like a new radio. Anyway, today is going to be all about adding the oh so famous audio input that I add to all these guys. And that involves running a audio cable, well, a cable to the volume control, and oh, I knew it'd do this. It'd stick. All right. So here's the volume control, and the volume control has 3 leads: a top and a bottom, and then a center. And the top is where the IF signal comes in. This thing is just basically a giant resistor, and all it does is it's just like creating more or less resistance, and that's what gets your radio to play louder or quieter. I'm looking at this and I can tell this has to be the ground because it's connected to that, and that's the ground for the electrolytics. So that's easy. So what I want to do is cut a tiny little cut right there so that will disconnect the IF signal, otherwise known as the radio signal. That way we can run a little piece of wire off of that to the back through a hole that has a switch coming out the back cover of the radio, and that will serve as a switch to turn the IF signal back on and off. And then we're going to run this we're going to run audio through an isolation transformer, which I sure hope I have some sitting around. I don't remember, but if not, I guess I'll have to dig around and find some other wallwart. Turns out I do have isolation transformers. They were in my pile of crap that I never clean up. So what we'll want to do is this. So imagine that we have a 3.5 millimeter stereo cable that comes in through this side of the transformer. This is the secondary. Now, for those of you who are playing at home, people like think an isolation transformer is something crazy, and all it is just like, it's just a transformer. In fact, it's identical to the transformer that you use to charge up your phone. There's about 120 volts that goes in, and then anywhere from 6 to 12 volts that comes out the other side. And so all we're doing is running basically backwards through the transformer to the volume pot, like this. See, either side of the pins here go to either side of the pot here. That way the user will be absolutely guaranteed to be electrically isolated, even though there's really hardly anything ever on that anyway. It's not much on that volume control, but I guess we are going to the overall ground. So yes, there could be back current through that. I'm talking to myself. There's nowhere to put it on here. No room. So what I'm going to have to do is I'll wire everything up in advance, and then when we reinstall the chassis, we can glue this, as close as we can to the volume control, which is probably going to be there because the volume control is up there, so maybe even that close. You want to avoid having long leads when it has anything to do with audio, because then you can cause the audio to sound like garbage, and you've got a loud hum, so you want to keep everything nice and tight. Well, it worked. I cut the little cut there, and now it's on. And all I get is a little bit of hum. This is full volume, and all I'm getting is like a tiny bit of static and a little bit of hum. If the music were playing through it right now, it'd be unbearably loud. So that tells me it's probably going to be clean audio. Sometimes that can be affected. Sometimes when you run the switch wire, that can act like a miniature antenna. So you got to be careful about where you run your wiring. Well, here's the setup. We have the isolation transformer installed. These 2 leads off the primary are going to the volume control, as I showed, on either side, and then we have right-left channels of the incoming audio tied together through a set of 33 ohm resistors. The other side is ground to the audio cable. Here's our switch for turning the radio signal off and on. I have a music Bluetooth source playing. Anyway, that seems to be working pretty well. There's a few other things I need to do to kind of get this done. I need to solder the antenna wires back on, and also find a way to secure this. This is broken, and I think there's just enough threads here that the screw still worked. I reattached this with super glue, but I want to make sure it's not going to come off of there, because that's critical.
1, 2, 3, 4. Bebop, bebop,
All right, she's back together again. It's sounding good. That was with the Bluetooth. And then there's a little switch in the back here. Flip it over that way. That must have been the wrong switch. Hold on a minute.
Right back in
Oh, crap! Ah.
chance to place a better tree. This is bad.
Getting these people who are on my island. Well, 888 tax deal. That's 888. This isn't an NFL quarterback. I know I keep throwing it.
Anyway, there was a mention about what's going on in Hawaii. Since where I live, it only takes about 4.5 hours to fly there. We go there a lot. So super, super, super nice people over there. And unfortunately, in one of the areas we visited is on fire. And a couple of people got killed there today. So I'm sorry for everyone affected over there. And I know this episode will probably be in the future where this is all over. But anyway, just the same. Folks in Hawaii, stay safe. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching this episode. And as always, I appreciate your comments. I know that I'm not very good at getting back to some of you guys. I've been pretty busy at work and busy with making these radio restorations. So I'll try to get to them later. All right, guys, I'll see you next time. Adios.